Most people think that an indie game's success comes from either having a huge following or getting lucky, but that's not true. Every game's odds of success are to a certain extent reliably predictable, and the indie developers who do succeed use a very simple technique that most of us totally ignore that holds us back from making a decent revenue off our games. This technique enabled Jonas and Paul to make Thronefall success on Landslide, but it doesn't only work for indie legends. In fact, to prove it, myself and 22 other devs have been testing it for our next games. It's kind of mind-blowing just how easy this makes it to come up with really strong game ideas. I'm focusing on one part of a much bigger process in this video, but there is a PDF below that summarizes what we're doing, and if you grab that, I'll send you an email once I'm done refining the process so that you can use it for your game too. So if it's not luck, what is the difference between Thronefall and the rest of our games? I ran a poll recently to ask my viewers whether or not they'd buy their own indie games. A whopping 75% said they would. That's pretty impressive, right? If we look at these games, we should expect to see 3/4 of them to be a high enough quality that other people would want to buy them too. But as you might expect, the crushing truth is that the overwhelming majority of Steam games fail. This guy in the comments put it best. But on the flip side, you have games like Balatro making millions even though the developer thought it would flop. The reason I'm saying all this is to drive home the point that as game developers, we absolutely suck at judging our own games. So it's no wonder that we'll spend years on them hoping they'll do well because we like them, only to end up with like 9 user reviews, and that's only if we follow through and finish them. As far as I can tell, the best solution that puts pretty much every other game dev hack to shame and gets rid of that bias we all have so you don't end up wasting your time is prototyping. And that's a problem because there are a lot of misconceptions I had about prototyping that are probably holding you back from taking advantage of it too, and as far as I know, I don't think anyone has ever actually addressed these. So first of all, most of you watching this are probably already in the middle of working on your game. If you're neck deep into development, there's no point in doing a prototype since you've already made so much progress and everything works well enough. This was my exact situation with my Robin Hood game. A lot of people working on a game for that long sooner or later ask themselves whether or not they might be in the sunk cost fallacy, spending way too much time on a game that isn't going to make enough money to justify the time spent. I'm going to say something that's going to make a lot of you want to click off this video, but it's something I wish someone told me 5 years ago. And forgive my boldness, but it's probably the most important thing that you'll ever hear in your entire game dev journey. If you haven't prototyped your game, you're already in sunk cost fallacy. Okay, so if you're wondering whether or not you are, this is your wake-up call to stop so that you don't spend another year on a game that'll earn $300. 10,000 games will release on Steam this year. You can't survive on Steam without prototyping. Just launch your game, learn from it, and take the time to prototype for your next game. Okay, so for those of you who are still here, another difficulty you might find with prototyping is that if your game has a lot of mechanics and there isn't one that's more important than the rest, how are you supposed to prototype all of them? Once again, that's exactly what I thought about my Robin Hood game. There'd be no point in prototyping combat, archery, inventory, and whatever else since I had a pretty good idea as to how they were supposed to work, and it seemed to me that for a game as big as what I was making, it would save time to just go for it and build every feature step by step. As you might imagine, for all my hard work, this honestly just led to a poor quality game. And sure, I saved time, but guess what? I wasted 2 years making a game that I had no business making. So spending a day or a week prototyping doesn't waste time at all. It just makes the time that you do spend much more valuable. So what about if your game uses very similar mechanics to games that already exist in your genre? Is there a point to prototyping if they're essentially tried and true? Allow me to throw you another brutal truth. If your game is just rehashing a bunch of elements from the genre and it's not unique, yeah, there's nothing to prototype, but there's also no point in making that game because better versions of what you're trying to do already exist. Unless you're doing this as a hobby, because I'm sure someone in the comments will brag about their stubborn bad choices. Now, when you actually start making your prototype, make sure you don't fall into the same mistake I've seen some people make, which is just like with their games, they spend way too long making them when the whole point is to do this fast. So when you build your prototype, to keep things as simple and quick as possible, instead of wondering whether or not you should test multiple features, just stick to the core mechanic. There's no need to create UI or menus. You can use console logs instead of displaying text on screen. You don't really need materials, and in fact, your prototype should be ugly so that the focus is on the gameplay. If you're going to add procedural generation, you usually won't want to do that at this stage either. Here's the first prototype I made for our ongoing Game Dev Success Challenge. It's a space starfighter dogfighting game, but you probably wouldn't have been able to guess that since there's no space and there's no starfighters. This only took me a day to build, but I could have probably spent half that time. The tutorial text didn't have to be here, I didn't need this green crosshair, I didn't necessarily need to try multiple enemy types. That being said, I technically prototyped a few different variations while doing this, which proved useful. For example, I tried a version of the game where you'd have 3 predefined enemies to fight, and later I made a version where enemies would spawn randomly over time. The other advantage of prototyping is that if a new idea comes to mind, instead of wasting 2 years of work if you restart, you only lose like like a day or a week. Same thing if you realize that for whatever reason you can't actually build your idea, or you realize you're not enjoying working on it, or it turns out not to be as fun as you thought. This here is my second prototype. It's literally just a zero gravity character controller just to see if it was possible, and it turns out it is possible. And honestly, just floating in zero G is already pretty fun. I decided to pivot to this game instead, and I only lost a week instead of months. At least 3 members of the challenge also worked through 2 or 3 prototypes, and it took them incredibly fast to get these out. A very important part of this prototyping phase has been to test the simplicity of our ideas, because sometimes you don't see the full picture of the implications of what you think you want to build until you start working on it in the engine. So it's very important to make sure that these are actually games we can finish in 3 months. From my own experience, my first prototype idea was fun and I could build it, but my new idea was a lot simpler. My vision for it was much more clear, and I was immediately a lot more confident that I could finish it within the time frame. Now, for whatever reason, game developers, myself included, have a tendency to want to test everything in the same project. Or maybe it's just me, but for this challenge we prototyped the visuals separately from the game itself. This idea comes from Jonas as well, and it enabled us to go through a lot of art iterations ridiculously quickly. Like, some of these guys redesigned their art style several times over the span of a few days. And for myself, it helped me immensely to nail the art style, knowing that I can experiment and do whatever I want in the project, knowing that it wouldn't affect the gameplay anywhere else. And the other upside to this is that if you're constantly changing the art in your main game project, your builds are going to end up full of warnings and have massive bloat. So instead, I could use this art prototype project to import a bunch of assets, and then for the main game I would only need to import those packages that I now knew I actually needed. If this prototyping process sounds like it'll be helpful to you, grab the PDF below. The more prototypes you can afford to make, the better, but the biggest problem we haven't discussed yet is that not every prototype is going to be worth making. Your game needs to start off with a strong core idea that stands out and takes what you're passionate about and isolates it into something that you can actually reasonably finish in a short span of time, so that your project doesn't spin out of control before you even start. To do that and start off with a good foundation, watch this video next, because it will give you the best framework to make sure that your game is optimized for success from the get-go. Thanks for watching, and God bless.